I'm definitely asking, for forgiveness and a second chance out in life.
He asked for a second chance, and he got it. Tonight, our 8 News Now investigators explore why a year later he blew it. Well, it's a murder arrest that drew a lot of attention 2 decades ago.
And as time would tell, all eyes would be back on Mark Ford for the exact same reason. 8 News Now investigator David Charnes explores why he got that second chance and the warning a person close to one of his victims gave him those many years ago.
Oh, man killed and burglar identified.
That short sentence,
56-year-old Vincent Gomes,
was a big part of Roberta Gomes's life.
Arrested Mark Ford, 15 years old.
And that line is the reason he's no longer here.
Well, I think about it every February.
Every February, on the anniversary of Vincent Gomes's death. But little did Roberta Gomes know it would become the anniversary of his killer's death, too.
I felt bad for him, and I told him I'd always be there if he ever needed anything. And he did.
Roberta and Vincent were married 26 years, but divorced in the late 90s. They remained friends and lived together in this Piccoli Ranch home.
One afternoon, I came home, and all of a sudden, there's TV crews there, police cars running around.
It was February 2003.
It's been 20-some-odd years.
But Roberta remembers a lot from that day.
You need police, fire, or medical?
They both have been stabbed.
And the person, the child, whom officers would arrest.
And they said, well, your husband's been murdered by a person. Later I found out it was a person that lived over on Warrenville that I'd known when he was 10 years old.
That naive neighbor would soon become her ex-husband's killer, breaking into their home and stabbing Vincent in the neck. Too young to vote, too young to drink, but old enough to kill.
That's right. That's exactly right. That's exactly what I saw.
Crime scene photos of a then 15-year-old Mark Ford when the justice system forced him to grow up quick. A jury would find Ford guilty of second-degree murder. Roberta remembers telling Ford this as a judge handed down 2 life terms with the possibility of parole.
You're not going to get away with it. You might be punished in prison, but the dear Lord's not done with you yet. You will get yours again sometime.
In 2022, Ford, in custody now for almost all of that minimum 20 years, was up for mandatory parole. But this hearing was more of a formality than a finding. 2 laws the legislature passed in Ford's 2 decades in prison are making that second chance a closer reality. In 2009, Assembly Bill 474 retroactively granted offenders under the age of 16 mandatory parole if certain requirements like education and job training are completed. And in 2015, Assembly Bill 267 retroactively granted offenders under the age of 18 mandatory parole after serving 20 years in crimes resulting in death. The second followed 2 U.S. Supreme Court rulings, which also retroactively removed life sentences without parole for children.
So you come up with a total risk score of 6.
A risk assessment, a tool the parole board administers when making its decision, deemed Ford low risk, citing the age of his arrest, programming in prison, and lack of recent discipline. The order granting Ford parole also cites his, quote, positive institutional record and his participation in programs specific to addressing behavior that led to incarceration. But when the 8 News Now investigators asked the Department of Corrections about those specific programs, we were directed only to the document.
I have had 20 years to reflect on my actions that day.
20 years to the day Ford killed Vincent Gomes, and Doc released the now 35-year-old man to begin that second chance.
Metro Police say a man accused of shooting and killing 2 people within 5 days has died by suicide.
But within a year, Mark Ford was dead. On February 20th, Ford shot and killed 26-year-old Jessica Russo in the home they shared. And less than a week later, on February 25th, Ford shot and killed 44-year-old John Dorodiak outside this Dottie's. Ford then shot a third person who survived before taking his own life.
And it's heartbreaking.
Preston Shipp is a former prosecutor who's now with the Campaign for the Fair Sentencing of Youth, a group that advocated for changes in Nevada law.
What responsibility does the parole board have in making sure someone like Mark Ford has the education, has the skills, and has the mindset to not reoffend once he's back out in the world?
Parole boards are taking it very seriously, that when they have questions about whether someone can safely be released, they're keeping them in. They certainly don't have a crystal ball.
The future would show Mark Ford would be unlikely to do it again. According to CFSY, just 1% of young lifers, those unlike Mark Ford who had no chance of ever leaving prison, reoffend if released. And several studies the 8 News Now investigators reviewed show the longer a younger person spends in prison and the more access they have to programming, the more likely they can successfully reintegrate once released.
And I said, who is this calling, or something like this, or who is this?
Soon after, we called Gomes, telling her not only Ford was dead,
and you had no idea that he was even out of prison.
No.
But that he was even out of prison. Gomes said she was told the parole board would alert her to his release, but they never did. All these years later, she says Ford got a greater punishment.
To me, 21 years later, I was sort of shocked, but then I said, well, the dear Lord, I guess, did what he said he was going to do.
We asked to interview the parole board about what goes into these mandatory decisions like Mark Ford's, and instead, a spokesperson told us no commissioner was available at any time. Remember, these are taxpayer-funded positions that work for the good of all of us. We also asked the governor's office for comment, since it is the governor who appoints commissioners to the parole board. Out of the 7 commissioners on the board right now, Governor Joe Lombardo has appointed 1. He's only been in office for a year. And we did not get a response from the governor about this either. I'm David Charnes, 8 News Now.
David, thank you. Now, since Vincent Gomes' death, lawmakers enacted and voters approved Marsy's Law, which requires the state inform victims when an offender is released from custody. But we've learned victims have to sign up for that service to get notified. Our 8 News Now investigators attempted to reach Ford's family ahead of this story and did not receive a response.